The Mafia boss found the black maid fixing a child's torn dress and understood he'd misjudged her entirely. Sarah Matthews was on her knees, carefully stitching up a child's torn dress. The sunlight poured through the windows of the mansion, casting a warm glow on her tired face. She had been working nonstop, and the little girl had run up to her in tears, asking for help with her favorite dress. Despite her exhaustion, Sarah didn't hesitate. She knew that sometimes a simple act of kindness could change everything. As her needle moved through the fabric, Sarah's mind wandered back to the way she had been treated by the family she worked for. She was just a maid, an invisible presence in the grand scheme of their luxurious world. Her role was clear: serve, clean, stay out of the way. No one ever saw her for who she truly was, except for the people she helped. The little girl was one of the few who showed her kindness, and that alone was enough to brighten her day. What Sarah didn't know was that someone had been watching her. Victor Romano, the Mafia boss of this sprawling estate, had stepped into the room unnoticed. His gaze had been fixed on her as she worked, the sight of her calm determination striking him deeply. Victor had never been one to show much emotion. His world was filled with power, control, and fear. He didn't have time for softness or sentiment. But watching Sarah, stitching the torn dress with such care, something inside him shifted. He couldn't quite place it at first, but it was there. A nagging feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, he had been wrong about her. For so long, he had seen the maids and servants as nothing more than people to serve his needs, tools to maintain his empire. But here, in this quiet moment, he saw something different. Sarah wasn't just a maid. She was a person, full of kindness and patience, something that had been missing from his own life for years. As the moment stretched on, Sarah finished mending the dress and handed it back to the little girl, who ran off happily. Sarah wiped her hands on her apron and sighed, relieved that she had been able to help. Little did she know that her simple act of kindness had just begun to change the way Victor saw her and everything else. For the first time, Victor felt something stir in him. It was confusion, guilt, and a strange sense of respect, all mixed together. He couldn't ignore the feeling any longer. Maybe, just maybe, he had misjudged Sarah completely. As Sarah stood up from the floor, dusting off her hands, she felt a quiet sense of pride. She had done it. She had helped. It wasn't much, but the little girl's smile was enough to make it all worth it. As the child ran off, Sarah glanced over her shoulder, still caught in the moment. She didn't notice Victor standing there, his gaze fixed on her every move. The room had grown quieter since the child left, and Sarah found herself standing in an uncomfortable silence. She hadn't expected anyone to be watching, especially not Victor Romano. Victor had always carried himself with an air of indifference toward those who served him. To him, they were part of the background noise in his otherwise controlled world. But as he watched Sarah, his feelings began to change, and for once, he wasn't sure how to process it. His eyes followed her movements, the way her hands carefully worked the fabric, how her expression softened when she helped the child. There was a tenderness to her actions, a quiet strength that spoke volumes. It wasn't what he expected from someone who spent her days cleaning his mansion and serving the people in his life. Victor had been trained to never show weakness, never show empathy. It was the only way to survive in his world. Yet, here he was, feeling something unfamiliar, something he hadn't felt in years. As Sarah turned toward the door to leave, she caught a glimpse of Victor standing by the window. His presence was commanding, even in the stillness of the room. For a moment, she froze, unsure of what to do. Was he upset? Was she in trouble for doing something she wasn't supposed to? She hadn't heard him approach, but she wasn't surprised. He had that way about him, moving through spaces like he owned them. Is everything all right? Sarah's voice trembled slightly as she spoke. It wasn't often she was in the same room as Victor, and certainly not without the usual tension in the air. You seem troubled, she added, her gaze dropping to the floor, unwilling to meet his eyes. Victor didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, studying her. For the first time, Sarah felt a strange weight on her shoulders. She wasn't sure what it was, but the way he looked at her made her feel exposed, like he was seeing through her. He wasn't angry, not at all. Instead, there was something almost curious in his expression. Why did you help her? Victor's question came out more quietly than she had expected. She hesitated for a moment before answering, her hands nervously fiddling with the edges of her apron. Because she needed help, Sarah replied simply. It wasn't a complicated answer, and yet, it seemed to hang in the air between them. She didn't need to explain herself further. It was just who she was, someone who helped when she could, no matter how small the task might seem. Victor took a step closer, his boots making soft sounds against the polished floor. You do that often? He asked, his voice carrying a new layer of intrigue. Help people, I mean. Sarah felt a sudden rush of heat to her cheeks. She wasn't used to being asked personal questions, especially by someone like Victor. I do what I can, she answered, her voice soft. People are people, no matter their station. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything she had been through. Growing up, she had always been taught to help others, to show kindness even when the world was unkind to her. You're different, Victor said after a pause. I've never seen someone like you before. Sarah didn't know how to respond to that. Was it a compliment? Was it a statement of confusion? She couldn't tell. She simply nodded, unsure of what else to say. There was a long silence between them, and for a moment, Sarah could almost feel the walls between them breaking down. She wasn't sure why, but she felt a strange pull toward him. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, or maybe it was just the fact that he had actually asked her a question, something so rare, especially from someone like him. Victor was used to being in control, used to making the decisions, having everything fall into place according to his will. But Sarah had thrown him off. She had done something unexpected, something he couldn't easily categorize. And now, for the first time, he was wondering what else she was capable of. His mind raced as he considered everything that had just happened. The simple act of her helping that child had shaken something deep within him. He had misjudged her, hadn't he? She wasn't just a maid, a background character in his life. She was someone with depth, with kindness, and something that could challenge his way of seeing the world. As the minutes passed, Victor found himself caught in the moment. The room seemed to close in around them, the tension palpable. But it wasn't the same kind of tension he was used to. It was a tension that made him feel vulnerable, something he wasn't accustomed to. Finally, he spoke again, his voice steady, though there was a new undertone to it. You should rest, he said, his tone softer now. You've earned it. Sarah didn't know what to make of that. It was unlike any order he had ever given her before. But she simply nodded, still unsure of what to do with the strange feeling that had settled in her chest. As she turned to leave the room, she felt his eyes follow her. And for the first time, she wondered what it would be like to be seen for who she truly was, not just for the work she did. She walked out of the room, the sound of her footsteps echoing through the empty halls. But deep down, she knew that something had changed between them. And though she couldn't quite put her finger on it, she felt that this was just the beginning of something far more complex than either of them could have ever anticipated. The days that followed felt strange to Sarah. The usual rhythm of her life, the quiet and steady work, had been disrupted by that single interaction with Victor. She couldn't quite shake the feeling that something had changed, not just between them, but within herself as well. She had always been just the maid, invisible to everyone around her. But now there was a tension in the air whenever she crossed paths with him. It wasn't the kind of tension she was used to, filled with fear or anticipation of punishment. No, this was different. There was something about Victor now, something she couldn't put her finger on. He hadn't spoken to her again in the same way, but she had caught him watching her from a distance on more than one occasion. Sometimes his gaze was soft, almost thoughtful, and other times, it was filled with that same intensity that made her feel exposed. Sarah tried to ignore it. She had no time for distractions. Her duties kept her busy from dawn until dusk, and the house had its usual flow, with constant demands from Victor's guests and family. But there were moments, fleeting ones, when she would catch a glimpse of Victor, and her heart would flutter in a way that confused her. One afternoon, as she was cleaning the hallway, she heard footsteps approaching. At first, she thought nothing of it, but then she saw him. Victor. He was walking toward her, his usual confident stride, but there was something different about the way he moved today. His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest. She had become so accustomed to looking down when he was near, but today, something urged her to hold his gaze. Sarah, Victor said, his voice low but steady. She couldn't help but notice the way his tone was softer than usual, as if he was trying to convey something unspoken. Can you come with me for a moment? His request wasn't an order, but more of a simple suggestion. Sarah hesitated. She had always been careful to avoid direct contact with Victor, to remain invisible in his world. But this was different. Something had shifted between them, and it felt like the right thing to do. She nodded and followed him down the hall, unsure of what to expect. They reached his office, and Victor opened the door, stepping aside to let her enter. Sarah paused at the threshold, unsure of her place in a room so grand. "Don't be shy," Victor said with a small smile. "You're not a servant here, Sarah. Just come in." She stepped inside, her heart racing. The office was massive, filled with dark wood furniture, expensive artwork, and large windows that looked out onto the sprawling estate. Victor walked over to his desk and gestured for Sarah to sit in the chair across from him. She sat down, her hands nervously folding in her lap. Victor seemed to notice her discomfort and softened his gaze. "I know things have been strange between us," he began. "But I wanted to take a moment to tell you that I appreciate what you did the other day, helping that child. It was," he trailed off, clearly searching for the right words. "It was something I didn't expect, and it made me realize something about you." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure what to say. His words were unexpected, and she wasn't used to hearing anything that could be considered praise from him. "I've misjudged you," he continued, his voice steady. "I thought you were just like the others, here to do the work and nothing more. But you're not. You've shown me that there's more to you than I realized." Sarah's eyes widened slightly. She had never expected Victor to admit something like this. He was a man who was used to control, to being the one who called the shots. To hear him speak so openly, so vulnerably, was completely outside her expectations. "You're a person," he said, the words coming out almost as a revelation. "And I think I've been blind to that." Sarah wasn't sure how to respond. Her thoughts were racing. She had never thought of herself as anything more than the maid, the person in the background, always serving, always unseen. But here, in Victor's office, it felt as though the rules had changed. There was no anger in his eyes, no coldness, just a strange warmth that Sarah wasn't used to. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm just doing my job. I'm here to help." Victor nodded, but there was something more in his expression, something that seemed to speak volumes without him saying a word. "You're more than that, Sarah. Don't ever forget it." The silence that followed was thick with meaning. Sarah couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken to her like that, with such sincerity. For a moment, the world outside that room seemed to disappear. It was just the two of them, caught in a moment of understanding. When Sarah finally stood to leave, she felt different. Lighter somehow. She wasn't sure what had just happened, but something in the air had shifted. She had been seen, truly seen, by someone who had never considered her worth more than her role. And that, in itself, was something that she would carry with her. As she left Victor's office, she glanced back at him once more. He was already back to his work, but this time, she didn't feel invisible. This time, she felt something else. Respected. And that made all the difference. The following days were different for Sarah. She couldn't put her finger on it, but there was a subtle shift in the way things had unfolded since that moment with Victor. Every time she entered a room and saw him, there was something in his eyes, something she had never seen before. It wasn't just indifference anymore. There was curiosity. Respect, maybe? She wasn't sure, but she could feel the change. And it made her feel seen in a way she had never felt before. The work continued, as it always did. There were floors to clean, dishes to wash, and windows to polish, but now it was different. There was no longer the heavy weight of invisibility pressing down on her. When she entered a room, she was aware of her presence, of the fact that she mattered, even if it was just in small ways. The mansion felt bigger now, less cold, less like a place she was simply existing in. It felt like a place where she could be something more. She caught Victor's gaze once or twice, and every time, there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, as if he was seeing her for the first time. It wasn't the usual dismissal. It was something different. One afternoon, while Sarah was cleaning the grand hall, she was startled by the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned around to find Victor standing there, his hands in his pockets, a contemplative look on his face. "Sarah," he said, his voice low, "can you meet me in the study? I need to speak with you." The request was simple, but it sent a wave of nervous energy through her. She had spent so many years avoiding personal interaction with him, but now, it seemed inevitable. She nodded, setting her cleaning supplies aside. and followed him down the long corridor toward his study. The mansion was quieter than usual, the soft hum of the air conditioning the only sound filling the empty spaces. When they reached the study, Victor held the door open for her. "After you," he said with a slight nod. Sarah stepped into the room, her heart racing slightly. She had never been in here for more than a few seconds, just to deliver messages or drop off paperwork. The study was grand, with leather chairs, bookshelves lining the walls, and a large desk that dominated the space. Victor closed the door behind them, and Sarah stood awkwardly by the door, unsure of where to go. "Please, have a seat," he said, motioning toward the chair across from his desk. She hesitated for a moment, but then sat down, her hands folded tightly in her lap. There was a long pause before Victor spoke again, his eyes studying her intently. "I've been thinking about something," he began, his voice softer than usual. "Something that's been on my mind for a while now." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "What is it, sir?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I wanted to apologize," he said, the words coming out slowly, as if they were difficult for him to say. Sarah blinked in surprise, not sure if she had heard him correctly. "Apologize?" she repeated, her voice a little shaky. "Yes," Victor said, his gaze never leaving hers. "For how I've treated you. For the way I've treated everyone like you, for that matter. I've realized I've been wrong." Sarah's mind was spinning. She had never expected to hear these words from him. In all the years she had worked in this mansion, she had never once thought Victor would admit something like this. He was the powerful Mafia boss, the man who never showed weakness, never made mistakes. And yet, here he was, speaking with a sincerity that took Sarah off guard. "I've spent so much of my life building this empire, making sure everything is in control, that I've forgotten what it means to care for the people around me," he continued. You showed me that." Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She had never imagined that Victor would ever say anything like this to her. He had always been so distant, so commanding. And yet, now he was standing in front of her, admitting to mistakes, showing vulnerability in a way she had never seen. "You've earned my respect," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "And I realize that I haven't shown you the respect you deserve. For that, I am sorry." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. She had always known her worth, but to hear it acknowledged by Victor was something she never thought possible. She had worked so hard for so long, staying invisible, staying out of the way, never asking for anything in return. But now, in this moment, it felt like everything was different. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice soft. I never expected this from you." Victor gave a small nod. "I didn't expect it from myself either," he admitted. "But you've changed the way I see things, Sarah." There was another long pause, and Sarah felt the weight of his words sink in. She had never thought much of herself in this world, but now, for the first time, she felt truly seen, truly valued. And it wasn't just by anyone. It was by Victor, the man who held so much power in his hands. He was looking at her not as a servant, not as someone who was invisible, but as a person who mattered. "I want you to know," he said, his tone softer now, "that things will be different from now on. You won't be treated like this again." Sarah swallowed hard, the emotion in her chest threatening to spill over. "Thank you," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. As she stood to leave, she couldn't help but feel a sense of peace she hadn't known before. For the first time, she was leaving Victor's presence with more than just a sense of duty. She was leaving with a sense of dignity. And that made all the difference. The days following their conversation in the study were filled with an unfamiliar air of calm for Sarah. The routine of her work remained the same, but there was an invisible shift. It wasn't just the tasks she was carrying out, it was the way she felt about them. The feeling of invisibility she had lived with for so long seemed to be slipping away, piece by piece. For the first time, she felt that her presence mattered, that she was seen. Victor's apology had made something inside her change. She had never expected anything from him, especially not respect, but there it was. And though she wasn't sure what it meant for the future, for the first time, she felt hopeful. Victor had been different too. She had noticed his eyes on her from time to time, but there was no longer the same coldness. His gaze, now, was less distant, more aware. Every time their paths crossed, there was a subtle shift in the air. It wasn't a grand gesture, but the small changes, the softening of his voice, the rare moments when he actually spoke to her beyond work-related matters. made her wonder if the respect he spoke of was truly genuine. One afternoon, as Sarah was moving between the corridors of the mansion, she was caught off guard when she heard Victor's voice calling her name. "Sarah, could you come here for a moment?" The request was simple, but it made her heart skip a beat. She hadn't expected to hear from him, especially not when she was in the middle of something else. "Of course, sir," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady as she made her way to him. Victor was standing in the grand foyer, looking out the large windows that overlooked the estate. When he turned to face her, there was no business formality in his expression, just a quiet sincerity. "I wanted to speak with you," he said, his tone softer than usual. Sarah nodded, unsure of what to expect. Victor motioned for her to join him by the window. "What's on your mind, sir?" she asked cautiously, her hands clasped in front of her. Victor took a deep breath, clearly weighing his words before he spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said the other day, about how you help people," he began. "It made me realize something about myself, and about the way I've been living my life." Sarah glanced up at him, sensing the seriousness in his tone. She had never seen Victor open up like this before, and it was clear that this conversation was different from all the others. "I've spent so much of my time focused on power, on building something that feels unshakable," he continued. "But I've ignored the people around me. People like you, Sarah. People who actually matter." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. She had never expected Victor to say something like that, especially after all the years she had worked for him. To hear him speak with such vulnerability, to acknowledge her worth as a person, and not just a servant, was something she could barely process. "I've been wrong about a lot of things," Victor added, his voice growing quieter. "And I want to change that. I want to make things right." Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. She was overwhelmed by the sincerity of his confession, the weight of the realization that Victor, the man who had been so distant and cold, was now recognizing her humanity. "You've earned my respect," Victor said, his voice steady now. "And I won't forget that." The silence that followed was thick with meaning. Sarah didn't know what to say. What could she say to someone who had never once treated her like a person, but now was showing her the kind of respect she had always longed for? "Thank you," she finally whispered, her voice soft. "You don't have to apologize. I've always done my best, that's all." Victor gave a small, appreciative nod. "You're too humble," he said with a smile. "But I'll make sure you know how much you're valued here. From now on, things will be different." Sarah nodded, still processing the unexpected kindness in his words. She had never imagined that she would hear this from him, but now that she had, it felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. As she turned to leave, she felt the familiar heaviness of duty calling her back to the tasks at hand. But this time, it didn't feel as burdensome. The simple acknowledgment of her worth had made all the difference. She walked away with a lightness she hadn't known in years, knowing that this small but powerful change would ripple through the days to come. As she continued with her work, her steps felt steadier, her movements more purposeful. Victor had made her feel seen, and that was more than she ever thought she could hope for. The days that followed Victor's confession brought a new sense of balance to Sarah's life. She still worked hard, as she always did, but now there was a subtle difference in how she carried herself. She no longer felt invisible. Even when she was performing the most mundane tasks, she held her head a little higher, her steps a little more confident. Victor's words had meant more to her than she could express. It wasn't just the apology, it was the recognition. For the first time in her life, she felt like she mattered to someone who held so much power, someone who had never given her a second thought before. As the days went by, Victor's behavior remained consistent. He continued to treat her with the respect he had promised, never once reverting to the cold indifference that had marked their past interactions. It was a subtle but unmistakable change. When he passed her in the halls, he would give her a nod or a word of acknowledgment, something that made her feel seen, valued. He even began asking for her opinion on minor matters, something she would never have imagined in the past. One afternoon, as Sarah was cleaning the library, she found herself alone in the room, dusting the rows of bookshelves. The house was quiet, the only sound the soft shuffle of her cleaning cloth against the wood. She paused for a moment, looking out the large windows that overlooked the estate. The sunlight poured in, casting long shadows across the room. It was a peaceful moment, the kind she cherished. Just as she was about to return to her work, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. Sarah didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Victor's presence was unmistakable, the weight of his footsteps reverberating through the floor. She turned, wiping her hands on her apron, and smiled politely. "Sir," she said, acknowledging him. "Sarah," Victor said with a slight nod, his eyes meeting hers. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "No, sir. I was just finishing up," she replied. "Good," he said, stepping into the room. "I've been meaning to ask you something." Sarah paused, unsure of what to expect. "What is it, sir?" she asked, her voice steady. "I've been thinking," he began, his gaze thoughtful. "I know you've been here for a long time, but I want to make sure you're not feeling trapped in this role. You deserve more than just being the maid." Sarah blinked in surprise. She had never expected to hear something like this from Victor. It wasn't that she didn't understand that he respected her now, but to hear him say she deserved more felt almost surreal. "I appreciate your concern, sir," she said, her voice a little quieter. "But I'm fine. This is my job, and I've always done it to the best of my ability." Victor studied her for a moment, his eyes not missing the slight hesitation in her tone. "You deserve more than this," he said again, his voice firm. "And I won't stand by and let you feel as though you're stuck in a position that doesn't value you properly." Sarah felt a strange flutter in her chest. His words, the sincerity in his voice, hit her harder than she expected. She had always been content with her work, had always told herself that she didn't need anything more. But hearing Victor speak like this made her wonder if maybe she did. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. "That means a lot." "It's the least I can do," Victor replied, his tone gentle. "I want you to know that I'm not just saying this to make you feel better. I want to make real changes here, for everyone, including you." Sarah nodded, unsure of how to respond. She had always believed that her place in the world was defined by what others saw her as. But now, she was starting to wonder if maybe she had more potential than she realized. If maybe, just maybe, Victor was right. As she left the library that afternoon, her mind was racing. She felt a surge of gratitude toward him, but also a sense of unease. What did this mean for her future? Could she allow herself to believe that she was worthy of something more, something better? The thoughts swirled in her mind, but one thing was certain. Victor had opened a door for her, a door she had never dared to imagine before. That night, as she lay in bed, Sarah thought back to the way things had been when she first arrived at the mansion. She had been young, eager to prove herself, but also terrified. Over the years, she had come to accept her place in the world. She had accepted that she would always be invisible, that she would always be the one who served others without ever being seen for who she truly was. But now, with everything that had happened, Sarah wasn't so sure anymore. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like it was within her control. She could shape it, mold it into something more than just the life she had been living. The next day, she found herself walking with more purpose than before. She still performed her duties, but now there was a sense of pride in everything she did. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was someone who deserved respect, someone who had a voice, someone who could make a difference. And as she passed Victor in the hallway that afternoon, their eyes met, and for the first time, she didn't look away. Instead, she smiled. It was small, but it was real. And in that moment, Sarah realized that the change she had been waiting for wasn't something that would happen to her. It was something she had already begun to create for herself. In the weeks that followed, Sarah's life at the mansion became a strange mixture of routine and transformation. She continued her work, of course, but it no longer felt like something she did just to survive. There was a sense of purpose behind every task, a quiet confidence that she hadn't known before. The respect Victor had shown her was not just a passing moment. It was a shift in how she viewed herself. She wasn't invisible anymore. Even the other staff members had begun to treat her differently, as if they, too, had noticed the change. It was subtle, but it was there. People no longer whispered when she passed by. There were no more condescending glances, no more mocking whispers behind her back. It was as if they were finally seeing her the way she had always wanted to be seen, the way Victor had seen her. But, as much as things had changed, Sarah still remained cautious. She couldn't completely shake off the years of feeling like she didn't matter. She had spent so long in the background, serving others without ever being acknowledged for her worth. So even with Victor's words echoing in her mind, she found herself unsure of how to move forward. Could she really trust that the changes were genuine? Could she allow herself to believe that she was truly deserving of more? One day, as Sarah was preparing for another busy afternoon of cleaning, she was approached by Victor again. This time, there was no question of her work or her position. He had something else on his mind. "Sarah," Victor said as he stepped into the hallway where she was dusting a vase, his voice low and serious. "I need to speak with you." She turned, feeling a knot tighten in her stomach. It had been a while since they had had one of their conversations. "Of course, sir," she replied, setting the cloth aside. Victor looked at her, his gaze more intense than usual. There was a quiet urgency in his tone. "I've been thinking," he began, glancing around to make sure no one else was nearby, "about what you said. About what I said. And I want to make sure that you understand that I meant it. Everything I said." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "I do, sir," she said quickly, trying to keep her voice steady. "You've been very kind." But Victor didn't seem satisfied with that. He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm not just being kind, Sarah," he said, his voice low but filled with conviction. "I see something in you. I see more than just a maid. You're different. And I want to make sure that you have the opportunity to show that, to do more than just clean these walls every day." Sarah felt her breath catch. "What do you mean?" she asked, unsure of where this conversation was going. "I mean," Victor said, his expression serious, "that I want to offer you a position. A real position. Something that values you for who you are, not just the work you do." Sarah's mind raced, her thoughts spinning. A position? Something more than cleaning? She had never imagined such an offer. In all her years at the mansion, she had never once thought that she could be more than just a maid. But here was Victor, offering her an opportunity to step outside the role she had played for so long. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't have to say anything right now," Victor said, his tone gentle but firm. "I just want you to think about it. You deserve more than what you've been given, Sarah." "I know that now." Sarah stood there, speechless, as the weight of his words settled over her. She had spent so many years believing that she was nothing more than the job she did, that her worth was tied to her duties. But Victor had shown her a different side of herself, a side she had never allowed herself to see. As she walked away that afternoon, her mind was filled with questions. Could she accept this new opportunity? Could she step into a new role, one that recognized her value as more than just a servant? For the first time, she began to imagine what that might look like. What would it mean for her life, for her future? And as the days passed, she found herself thinking about Victor's words more and more. She began to see the mansion differently, no longer as just a place where she worked, but as a place where she could grow, where she could finally be seen for who she truly was. Victor's offer was a turning point. It was a chance to rewrite her story, to step into a new chapter. And as she began to imagine that future, she realized that she had the power to shape it, to create the life she had always deserved. The shift wasn't just in Victor's treatment of her, it was in the way she viewed herself. And that, she knew, was the most important change of all. The days after Victor's offer were filled with a quiet, uncertain anticipation for Sarah. She had never been in a position like this before, and she found herself constantly questioning whether she was truly worthy of such an opportunity. The thought of stepping into a new role, one that recognized her as more than just a maid, filled her with a mix of excitement and fear. She had spent so long accepting her place in the background, never daring to dream of a life beyond cleaning and serving. But now, with Victor's words echoing in her mind, she couldn't help but imagine what might be possible. Could she truly take that step? Could she embrace the future he had offered her, or was she destined to remain in the shadows forever? As the days passed, Sarah found herself spending more time reflecting on the life she had built for herself. The mansion, once a place of quiet discomfort and invisibility, had slowly transformed in her eyes. It wasn't just the respect that Victor had shown her, it was the way she had begun to see herself. The woman who worked tirelessly day in and day out, never expecting anything more, was now questioning her own worth in a way she had never done before. Sarah knew that making a decision about the offer would not be easy. She wasn't someone who made decisions lightly, especially when it came to her future. The idea of leaving behind the life she knew, the one that had been safe in its predictability, was daunting. She had grown comfortable in the routines, even if they were mundane. But the thought of more, of being seen, valued, and respected, stirred something deep within her. One afternoon, as she was dusting the hallway, she found herself lost in thought when Victor approached her once again. This time, he wasn't just passing by. He stopped in front of her, his expression serious, as though he had something important to say. "Sarah," he said, his voice quiet. "Have you had time to think about my offer?" Sarah straightened up, her heart skipping a beat. She had been expecting this, but hearing him ask made it feel more real. "I have, sir," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "And what have you decided?" Victor's gaze was unwavering, and Sarah felt the weight of his question settle on her. The answer wasn't easy. She had thought about it long into the night, the idea of stepping into a new role, of taking on more responsibility. But it wasn't just about the job, it was about how it would change her life, how it would change the way she saw herself. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's a big change, sir. I've always been in the background, never expecting anything more. I'm afraid I might not be good enough." Victor's expression softened, and for a moment, Sarah saw something in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. It was empathy, understanding. "Sarah," he said gently, "I've seen what you're capable of. You are more than good enough. You've always been. It's not about what you've done, it's about who you are." The words struck Sarah deeply, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. She had always felt like she was just the maid, just someone to clean and serve, never truly seen for who she was. But now, Victor was offering her something more, a chance to step into a role that recognized her for her worth, not just her labor. "You don't have to make a decision right now," Victor continued, his voice calm but firm. "But know that the offer stands, whenever you're ready, and know that I believe in you." Sarah nodded, her heart swelling with emotions she couldn't quite process. She had always been careful with her heart, never allowing herself to dream of a life beyond the confines of her role. But now, for the first time, she was being given a choice to step forward, to take control of her own future. As she left Victor that day, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The weight of uncertainty was still there, but it was lighter now, as though a part of her had been released. She knew that whatever she chose, she would no longer be defined by her past. She would be defined by who she chose to be moving forward. That evening, as Sarah sat in her small room, she couldn't stop thinking about Victor's words. "You are more than good enough." The phrase echoed in her mind, over and over, as if the universe was trying to tell her something. She had spent so long doubting herself, so long accepting less than she deserved, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen. But Victor had reminded her, and now, the decision was hers to make. She could continue on as she had, hiding in the shadows, or she could step into the light, take the opportunity he had given her, and embrace a future that was hers to shape. Sarah didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt ready to find out. And that, she realized, was the first step toward the life she had always deserved. The weeks that followed were a turning point for Sarah. Each day felt like a step forward, though she still found herself reflecting on the decision she had yet to make. The mansion was quieter now, not because the bustle of daily life had stopped, but because Sarah had begun to listen more to her inner thoughts. Victor's offer still echoed in her mind, but with each passing day, the hesitation that once gripped her heart loosened. She had always lived a life of practicality, never daring to think beyond the tasks in front of her. But now, she stood at the precipice of something more, something that might finally recognize her for the person she truly was. As the days passed, Sarah began to see her work in a different light. It was no longer about simply going through the motions. It was about being present, about taking pride in what she did. She no longer shrank from her responsibilities or hid in the shadows. Instead, she embraced them, knowing that they were the foundation of something greater. On one quiet afternoon, as Sarah was tending to the flowers in the courtyard, she caught sight of Victor walking toward her. It wasn't unusual for him to pass through this part of the estate, but today, there was something different in his stride. He wasn't just moving with his usual purpose. There was a certain calmness about him, as if he had something important to say. "Sarah," he called out softly, his voice carrying over the gentle rustle of the wind. She turned toward him, her heart beating just a little faster. "Sir," she replied, standing up straight and wiping her hands on her apron. "I've been thinking," Victor began, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet intensity. About your decision. Sarah felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her. She had known this moment would come, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure what to say. I've thought a lot about it, she said slowly, her voice steady. But I'm still not sure. It's a big change, Victor. I've never imagined myself in a different role. Victor took a step closer, his gaze softening. You've been in the background for far too long, he said, his voice gentle but firm. And I'm not asking you to change overnight. But I want you to know that I believe in you. You have more potential than you realize. Sarah felt her chest tighten at his words. She had spent so long doubting herself, never allowing herself to consider that she was capable of more. But Victor was offering her a chance to step into the light, to show the world, and herself, what she could truly achieve. I can't promise that I'll be perfect, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I'm willing to try. Victor smiled, a rare warmth in his expression. That's all I'm asking for, he replied. Just take the first step. We'll figure the rest out as we go. His words were simple, but they carried a weight that Sarah couldn't ignore. For the first time in her life, someone was offering her more than just a job. They were offering her a chance to build something of her own, to step into a future that she could shape. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah began to take small steps toward that future. She started by taking on more responsibilities at the mansion, stepping in to help with tasks beyond her usual scope. She helped organize events, took charge of overseeing the staff during important gatherings, and even began working directly with Victor on certain projects. Each step felt like a leap of faith, but with each one, she felt more confident, more capable. The respect that had once felt foreign to her now felt like a natural part of her life. It wasn't just the recognition from others. It was the way she had begun to see herself. She was no longer just the maid. She was someone with value, with purpose. And it was clear to her now that she had the power to create her own destiny. One evening, after a particularly busy day, Sarah found herself in the library, organizing some of the bookshelves. It was a quiet moment, one that gave her time to reflect on everything that had changed. The soft light from the chandelier above cast a warm glow over the room, and Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past few months settle in her chest. She had come so far. As she adjusted a row of books, she heard footsteps approaching from behind. She turned, expecting to see one of the staff members, but instead, it was Victor. He stood in the doorway, his usual calm demeanor replaced with something a little more thoughtful. Sarah, he said, his voice low. I wanted to thank you. Sarah blinked in surprise. Thank me, she repeated. For what? Victor stepped into the room, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet intensity. For everything, he said. For trusting me, for stepping into this role, for proving to yourself that you are capable of more. You've done more than I could have ever hoped for, and I want you to know that I see it. I see you. The words took Sarah by surprise, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. She had never expected to hear such praise from Victor. He had always been the one in control, the one who gave orders, who made decisions. To hear him acknowledge her, truly acknowledge her, felt like a validation of everything she had been working toward. Thank you, Victor, she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. I didn't know I was capable of all this. He smiled, that same rare warmth lighting up his face. You're more than capable, Sarah. You always have been. As Sarah stood there, in the quiet of the library, she realized that this was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment when she truly believed in herself. The future was no longer uncertain. It was hers to shape, and she was ready to take the next step, whatever it might be. As the months passed, Sarah found herself more and more immersed in the new role Victor had offered her. It wasn't just the task she was doing or the recognition she had earned. It was the shift in her entire outlook on life. She had started out as the maid, hidden in the background of the mansion's grandiosity. But now, she was becoming a key figure, someone whose opinion was valued, whose presence made a difference. It was a change that had started slowly, with small gestures and a shift in the way she was treated, but now it was undeniable. Sarah had grown into this new version of herself, and the life she had once thought of as a simple existence was now filled with purpose and possibilities. Each day she walked through the halls, she no longer felt invisible. She felt like she belonged, and more than that, she felt like she was important. Victor's continued support had helped her gain the confidence she needed. He trusted her more with the daily running of the estate, even involving her in strategic decisions that were once reserved for a select few. Though she had been hesitant at first, unsure of whether she could live up to the expectations, she now knew that she was capable of far more than she had ever given herself credit for. But even as Sarah flourished in her new role, she couldn't shake the sense of vulnerability that lingered beneath her calm exterior. She had worked so hard to get to this point, but what if she failed? What if, despite everything, she couldn't keep up with the changes that had come so quickly? It was a fear she hadn't voiced to anyone, not even to Victor. But it was always there, lurking in the back of her mind. One evening, after a long day of overseeing an important event at the mansion, Sarah found herself alone in the garden, staring up at the stars. The night air was cool, and the scent of jasmine drifted on the breeze. She had spent so much of her life focused on survival, on making it through the next day, that she had never taken the time to stop and appreciate the beauty around her. But now, as she stood in the quiet of the garden, she realized that she had something to be proud of. She had built a life for herself, something she had never thought possible. As she walked slowly through the garden, she found herself thinking about Victor. Their relationship had changed so much over the months. From the cold, distant man who had barely acknowledged her existence to the person he was now. The one who valued her, who trusted her, who saw her for who she truly was. It was a transformation she never could have imagined. But the biggest change, she realized, was in herself. She was no longer the shy, timid woman who had only ever known how to serve. She was someone who stood tall, who made her voice heard, and who knew her own worth. The thought brought a smile to her lips as she continued her walk, her steps steady and sure. When she turned a corner and found herself near the main house, she was startled to see Victor standing by the door, watching her with an unreadable expression. "Sarah," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I wanted to speak with you." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat, but she didn't hesitate. She had come to understand him better, and she trusted him more than she had ever trusted anyone before. "Of course, Victor," she replied, her voice steady as she approached him. Victor stepped aside, allowing her to enter the house, and they walked into the quiet sitting room. The warmth of the fire in the hearth filled the space, and Sarah could feel the weight of his gaze on her as they sat down. "I've been thinking," Victor began, his voice low and thoughtful, "about everything that's happened, about everything that's changed." Sarah nodded, waiting for him to continue. She wasn't sure what he was going to say, but she could feel the significance of the moment. "You've done something remarkable, Sarah," Victor said, his eyes meeting hers with a sincerity that made her heart swell. "You've transformed not only yourself, but this entire place. I never could have imagined that the woman I first met all those months ago would become the person you are today. You've surpassed every expectation I had, and you've done it with grace, intelligence, and strength." Sarah felt the weight of his words settle on her. She had always doubted herself, always questioned her worth, but hearing Victor say this, hearing him truly acknowledge her, made her feel seen in a way she never had before. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I never thought I would be here, doing this." "That's the thing," Victor said, his voice low but filled with conviction. "You were always capable of this. You just needed someone to see it, to believe in you." Sarah didn't know what to say. She had spent so long doubting herself, so long feeling invisible, that she hadn't allowed herself to truly dream. But now, with Victor's words echoing in her mind, she realized something. She wasn't just capable, she was worthy. She was worthy of this life, of the respect she had earned, and of the future she had the power to create. "Victor," Sarah said quietly, her voice filled with newfound determination, "I'm ready. I'm ready to step into this future. I'm ready to be the person I've always wanted to be." Victor smiled, a rare, genuine smile that softened his usual intensity. "I'm proud of you, Sarah, more than you know." And in that moment, as they shared a look of mutual understanding, Sarah realized that the change she had feared, the uncertainty she had lived with for so long, had finally passed. She had stepped into her power, and there was no going back. She was ready for whatever came next, knowing that she had already overcome the hardest part, believing in herself. The weeks that followed Victor's words brought an undeniable shift in Sarah's life. Each day, she found herself embracing her new role more confidently. Yet there were moments when she couldn't help but feel a sense of disbelief. Her transformation, From the woman who had only ever been seen as the maid to someone who was now a key figure in the mansion, still felt surreal. The respect she had earned was evident, not just from the people around her, but from herself as well. She walked through the halls with a sense of purpose, and each time she interacted with Victor, there was a subtle yet profound recognition between them, something that had never existed before. It wasn't just about the work anymore. It was about the understanding, the connection, and the silent acknowledgment of each other's worth. Sarah had finally started to believe in herself. She was more than just a servant, more than the tasks she completed every day. She had value, she had strength, and she was capable of creating a future that reflected that. But even as she thrived in this new role, there was a part of her that still wondered if this change could truly last. Could she maintain this new version of herself, or was she destined to return to the shadows? One evening, as she was overseeing a small dinner gathering at the mansion, Sarah found herself once again in the familiar position of serving. She moved gracefully between the guests, offering drinks and ensuring that everyone had what they needed. But this time, something felt different. The atmosphere was still formal, yet there was a warmth to it that hadn't been there before. Sarah noticed the way the guests spoke to her, respectful, even appreciative, and for the first time, she felt truly comfortable in her role. She was no longer just a background presence, but a part of something bigger. As the evening wore on, Sarah found herself standing by the door, observing the guests as they mingled and laughed. The soft glow of the chandelier above cast a golden light over the room, and she couldn't help but smile. She had come so far. Her journey, though filled with doubts and uncertainties, had led her to a place where she could stand tall, not just as a maid, but as a woman who had earned her place. Just as she was lost in thought, she felt a familiar presence beside her. Victor. He had been moving through the room, speaking with various guests, but now he was standing next to her, his eyes meeting hers with an unreadable expression. "Sarah," he said, his voice soft but steady. "I just wanted to take a moment to tell you that I'm proud of you." Sarah looked up at him, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. "You've done more than just prove your worth," he continued, his gaze never leaving hers. "You've shown yourself to be a woman of strength and integrity, and I don't take that lightly." For a moment, Sarah didn't know how to respond. She had heard praise from Victor before, but this felt different. It was more than just acknowledgment. It was a genuine recognition of who she had become. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "I never thought I would hear you say that." Victor smiled, the warmth in his expression reaching his eyes. "You've earned every bit of it," he replied. "And I want you to know that you're more than just a part of this estate. You're an integral part of this family." The words felt like a weight being lifted off Sarah's shoulders. She had spent so much of her life doubting her place in the world, wondering if she was truly worthy of anything more than what she had been given. But now, with Victor's words sinking in, she realized something. She wasn't just capable, she was deserving. She had worked hard, fought through the doubts and fears, and had come out stronger on the other side. And now, for the first time, she could see herself not just through the lens of her past, but through the eyes of someone who valued her for who she truly was. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, but as Sarah left the dining room and made her way to her quarters, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known before. The weight of her past, the uncertainty, the self-doubt, all of it seemed to fade away. She was no longer defined by what she had been, but by who she had become. She was a woman who had taken control of her life, who had stepped into her power and found a place where she could thrive. As she sat in her room later that night, her mind raced with possibilities. For the first time, the future didn't seem so daunting. It was full of potential, full of promise. And no matter what came next, Sarah knew one thing for certain. She was ready for it. She had earned her place in this world, and she would continue to fight for the life she deserved. As the months passed, Sarah began to feel a deeper sense of belonging at the mansion. The transition from the timid, invisible woman she once was to the confident and capable person she had become was no small feat. It wasn't just the tasks she was handling now. It was the way she was seeing herself. Each day, she walked through the halls with more purpose. She had not only earned the respect of the people around her, but had started to respect herself in ways she had never thought possible. The fears that once held her back, the doubts about her worth and place in the world, had faded. She had found her voice, and it was no longer a whisper. It was strong, clear, and sure. One evening, as she walked through the mansion's grand hall, she found herself once again face to face with Victor. Their relationship had changed so much over the last few months, from professional distance to a deep mutual understanding and respect. He had trusted her with more responsibilities, and Sarah had exceeded every expectation he had of her. There was no longer any formality or distance between them. They were colleagues, allies, and something more, partners in the work they had to do. Victor stood by a large window, looking out at the estate. The soft glow of the chandelier reflected off the glass, casting a warm, inviting light over the room. When he turned to face Sarah, his usual composed demeanor softened. "Sarah," he said, his voice carrying a certain weight to it, "I've been thinking." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She knew that tone. It wasn't a simple request or a casual comment. It was something more. "What is it, sir?" she asked, though she knew that their conversations had long since transcended the formalities. "I've been thinking about everything that you've done here, everything you've brought to this place," Victor continued, his eyes searching hers. "You've made this mansion more than just a house. You've made it a home." Sarah didn't know what to say. She had never expected to hear him speak like this, not even after everything they had shared. "I'm proud of you, Sarah," he added, his voice softer now. "I've seen the growth, the strength in you, and I want you to know that it hasn't gone unnoticed." For the first time, Sarah felt a warm rush of gratitude in her chest. She had spent years being overlooked, being the one who stayed behind the scenes, who served without ever being seen for who she was. But now, Victor's words filled the void that had lingered for so long. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't think I could ever be something more than what I was. But now I see it." "You've always been more than that," Victor replied, stepping closer to her, his eyes never leaving hers. "You just needed to see it for yourself." In that moment, something shifted inside Sarah. It wasn't just the recognition she had longed for. It was the realization that she had done more than just change the way others saw her. She had changed the way she saw herself. Victor smiled, a rare, genuine smile that softened his usually serious expression. "And there's one more thing," he said, his tone becoming more purposeful. Sarah felt her heart race. "What is it?" she asked, though she had an inkling of what might be coming. "I want to offer you a new position," Victor said, his voice firm but filled with warmth. "A real position, something that reflects the role you've taken here. I want you to be more than just a part of the estate's operation. I want you to be a key figure, someone who helps shape the future of this place." Sarah felt her breath catch. This was it, the offer she had been both hoping for and dreading. It wasn't just a position, it was a new life, a new future. And it was hers if she was ready to accept it. "Victor," she said quietly, her voice trembling with emotion, "I don't know what to say. I never imagined this." Victor placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and reassuring. "You don't have to say anything right now," he said softly. "But I want you to know that this is more than just a job offer. It's a chance for you to step into your power, to take control of your future. And I believe you can do it." For a moment, Sarah was silent, letting his words sink in. She had spent so long doubting herself, never daring to imagine a future that didn't involve serving others in the background. But now she was being given the opportunity to stand at the forefront, to take the reins of her own life. Slowly, she nodded. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady now. "I'm ready to take that step." Victor smiled, a look of pride in his eyes. "I knew you were," he said, "and I'm glad to have you by my side." As Sarah walked away from their conversation, her mind was filled with thoughts of the future. She wasn't just moving forward in her career, she was moving forward in her life. And for the first time, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had earned this moment, this opportunity, and she was ready to embrace it fully. Sarah had discovered something far more valuable than a new role. She had discovered her own strength, her own worth. And with that, she was ready for whatever came next. As Sarah stepped into the new role Victor had entrusted her with, she found herself grappling with a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. She had spent so much of her life living in the background, doubting her own potential, but now she was standing at the center of something much bigger. It wasn't just about the position, it was about the new identity she had carved for herself, one that no longer relied on the limitations she had once placed on her worth. She had proven to herself, and to Victor, that she could do more than just serve. She could lead, think, and make decisions that shaped the future of the estate. It was the first time in her life that she felt as though the path ahead was hers to choose. Yet, as the days passed and she took on more responsibilities, she couldn't shake the sense of uncertainty that still lingered in the back of her mind. There were moments when she felt overwhelmed, when the weight of the decisions she was now making seemed almost too heavy to bear. But then, she would remember Victor's words, how he had seen her for who she truly was, how he had believed in her when she had not believed in herself. That belief had given her the strength to keep moving forward. It was on one of these particularly challenging days, when Sarah was overseeing the planning for an important event at the mansion, that she found herself once again facing a crossroads. The pressure to succeed felt intense, the expectations both from herself and from others weighing on her. She stood in the grand ballroom, the space empty except for the staff moving about, preparing for the evening's guests. The chandelier above glittered in the soft light, casting a warm glow across the room, but Sarah's mind was elsewhere. She had been running around all day, ensuring that everything would be perfect, but something inside her felt unsettled. She had worked so hard to prove herself, but now she wondered if she was truly ready for all of this. Just as she was lost in thought, she felt a presence beside her. She turned to find Victor standing there, watching her with a calm expression. "Sarah," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "I've been watching how you've handled everything. You've done well." The compliment surprised her, especially after the whirlwind of emotions she had been experiencing that day. "Thank you, Victor," she replied, though her voice was quieter than she had intended. She had no idea how much he had noticed or how he saw her now. But in that moment, she realized that his recognition meant more to her than she had let on. "I know this is a lot for you to take on," Victor continued, his gaze never leaving hers. "But I want you to know that I'm here for you, just as I promised. You're not doing this alone." Sarah felt a rush of gratitude. She had doubted herself countless times, convinced that she wasn't capable of handling the responsibilities Victor had given her. But here he was, offering her reassurance in the most unexpected way. She had spent years serving without ever being seen for the full extent of her potential, and now, for the first time, she felt like she had found her place. "I don't know what to say," Sarah said softly. "I've been so focused on proving myself that I forgot what it feels like to have someone believe in me." Victor gave a small, understanding nod. "That's the difference between being a servant and being a leader," he said. "You can't do it alone, and it's okay to rely on those who see your worth." His words resonated deeply with Sarah. She had always thought that she needed to carry everything on her own, that she couldn't rely on anyone else. But Victor's support was different. It wasn't just about him giving her a position or recognition. It was about him seeing her as an equal, as someone who was capable of more than she had ever thought. For the first time, she understood what it meant to be part of something bigger than herself. As the evening approached and the guests began to arrive, Sarah found herself standing at the entrance to the ballroom, watching as everything came together. The staff moved with precision, the room filled with chatter, and the guests made their way into the grand space. Sarah had been nervous about how she would handle the event, but now, standing in the heart of it all, she felt a calm confidence that she had never known before. This was her moment. She was no longer the woman who worked quietly in the background, unnoticed. She was now someone whose decisions mattered, whose presence commanded respect. The evening went smoothly, and Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in everything that had come together. Victor was there, overseeing the event with his usual composed demeanor, but when his eyes met hers across the room, she saw a flicker of approval in his gaze. It wasn't just a look of recognition, it was a look of pride. It was then that Sarah realized that the transformation she had undergone wasn't just about her career. It was about her own self-worth. She had been given the opportunity to rise, and she had done so not by taking from others, but by embracing her own potential. The path ahead was still unknown, and Sarah knew that challenges would come, but she was no longer afraid. For the first time, she understood that she had the strength to face whatever came her way. And with that, she knew she was ready for whatever the future held.